Everyone laughed at the girl for marrying a poor beggar, not realizing he was the hidden CEO. Imagine being forced to marry someone you despise, while your own sister wears your wedding dress behind your back. That's exactly what happened to Guan, who found herself trapped in a nightmare of family betrayal and business politics. But fate has a strange way of creating unexpected twists. When Guan meets a beggar on the street and saves his life, little does she know she's about to encounter the most powerful man in the city, a man who will turn her world upside down and make everyone who laughed at her regret their action. On what should have been the happiest day of her life, Guan walked into a scene she could never have prepared for. The lavish wedding hall was bustling, the guests already seated, their eyes darting toward her with a mix of curiosity and confusion. But Guan barely noticed. A delicate lace veil framed her smug expression perfectly as she casually laughed with Lumeni Gwen's fiancé, or rather the man who had betrayed her, without a shred of shame. He looked entirely unbothered, one arm thrown around Lan's shoulder, his smile as self-assured as it was infuriating. The room seemed to close in on Guan. The ornate decorations, the vibrant red and gold drapery meant to symbolize prosperity and happiness, now felt cruelly ironic. The chatter of family and guests turned to whispers, and although she couldn't make out their words, the weight of their judgment pressed heavily against her chest. She felt their eyes piercing her, as if her humiliation had become some kind of spectacle. But nothing hurt more than the smirk on Juan's face, coupled with the dismissal in Lumeni's eyes, as if this whole charade was just another business transaction for him. The marriage between us is the whole North. Her father's booming voice had reminded her time and time again in the weeks leading up to this day. Everyone knows they're getting married tomorrow. If you dare to marry now, don't blame me. You're welcome then, just wait and see. And now, Guan understood the deeper meaning behind his words. This was not just a wedding, not just a union. It had been orchestrated as a deal. The Liu family was leveraging Guan as a bargaining chip, her very life intertwined with the family's ambitions. Lumeni, the wealthy son of the Liu family's closest business partner, had looked like the perfect choice on paper, a man with resources, connections, and influence. But his heart, or lack thereof, had proven entirely unsuitable for someone like Guan. And then there was Juan, the cunning younger sister, who had always hovered in the background, waiting for moments like this to claim what wasn't hers. Every fiber of Guan's being screamed for her to run, to disappear from this orchestrated betrayal that commanded audience applause as though it were a performance. Yet, she stood rooted to the spot, her mind ablaze with thoughts of how her life had boiled down to this humiliating tableau. The weight of her father's expectations loomed like a shadow behind her, his booming voice echoing in her mind. The marriage between us is the whole North. What did that even mean to him? Honor? Money? The unyielding preservation of some paper-thin facade that would crumble the moment someone actually cared to look closely. Her inner turmoil was unbearable. On one hand, she grappled with the heartache of a fiancé who had cast her aside as if she were a mere placeholder in his life. But it wasn't just the betrayal of a lover. This was a betrayal by a lover. This was a betrayal by her own blood, Juan, the sister she had grown up with. Family, after all, is supposed to be sacred. That bond had been broken before her eyes, in the most deliberate way possible. But Guan was not someone who could be pushed forever. Heart-pounding, she felt anger rising to drown the shame, when everyone expected her to crumble. Right there, in that opulent but empty hall, she made her decision, her hand clenched by her side, her nails digging into her palms, as if willing herself to focus. Her father had spent years controlling every aspect of her life, packaging her as a product to be delivered to whomever best served the family's interest. Even now, she could hear him yelling through gritted teeth, "You dare to ruin this partnership?" His threats always came with the promise of repercussions, but for the first time, they failed to instill even an ounce of fear. "I will not marry you," Guan's voice rang out loud, slicing through the murmurs of the crowd. Conversations came to an abrupt halt, There was no hesitation, no faltering, as her words resonated throughout the hall. A sea of stunned faces turned toward her. "What did you say? I can't hear you clearly." Lumieni mocked her, his confidence swelling from the approval of the Lu family standing in full force behind him. "I said, I will not marry a scumbag. Get out of here." Her tone was unshakable, and her words left no room for misinterpretation. The whispers erupted into chaos. Some gasped audibly. Others snickered quietly, as though entertained by what they thought was the downfall of a proud young woman. But Guan was unfazed. Her sister froze for just a moment, caught off guard by this act of defiance, though she quickly regained her composure and leaned into the facade of playing the doting new bride-to-be. Still, the smug confidence of both Guan and Lumeni never wavered, as if convinced Guan's outburst was nothing more than that, an emotional tantrum with no real consequences. But the truth was, it wasn't a tantrum. It was the start of something much bigger than any of them. A pivotal moment where one act of rebellion carried with it the promise of dismantling the very structures that had pinned Guan down for her entire life. Staring at him, as though memorizing the face that had wronged her, she turned on her heel and stormed toward the exit. Her steps were hurried but purpose-driven, the soft click of her heels swallowed by the mounting noise behind her. A chaos unleashed in her wake. Tight-lipped disapproval from elders, whispers of scandal among peers, and the Lu family desperately scrambling to contain a potential fallout that could destroy their deal. But for Guan, as she pushed through the heavy glass doors of the wedding hall and into the cold air, there was no relief yet. Outside, her chest heaved, and for the first time that night her emotions began to catch up with her. The weight of decades of silent obedience, suppressed desires, and buried identity hit her all at once. Yet amidst the turbulent storm raging in her heart, there was also clarity. This was the exact moment where the system bled its last drop of power over her. And she wasn't alone in this struggle. Cultural and familial obligations can be suffocating, and in many societies, women like Guan have historically been conditioned to prioritize duty over self. But betrayal has a way of shaking even the most tightly bound chains. The psychology of betrayal runs deep. Research illustrates that betrayal by close family often sparks intense emotional responses, feelings of anger and self-reproach, combined with a loss of trust in one's judgment. Guan's refusal to marry Lumeni was more than a rejection of the man himself. It marked her abandoning the rigid expectations built around her life. Like a cage. Her outburst, her defiance, and her escape from that hall were nothing short of revolutionary, because it wasn't just personal, it was cultural, it was symbolic, and it had consequences that would ripple far beyond that night. This betrayal, painful as it was, became the fire that reignited something long dormant inside her. Pushing through the dense crowd of curious onlookers gathering outside, Guan swore to herself that no one, not her sister, her father, Lumeni, or the social order they collectively upheld, would ever make her feel this small again. Her heart was fractured but filled with resolve, and it would be this determination to write her own story that would lead her to something neither Guan, Lumeni, nor even her father could anticipate. What awaited Guan now was a path entirely unknown to her, untrodden and full of perilous turns. Little did she know, walking away from her wedding wouldn't just be about leaving people behind. It would also send her colliding into one of the most unexpected twists of her life. Beggar didn't know how far she had walked. The echoes of her humiliation, the cold stares in the wedding hall, and the sting of betrayal still clung to her like thorny vines. Her heels, though exquisite, weren't meant for the cracked pavement of the city streets, and the pain in her feet was now fighting with the ache in her chest for her attention. The competing emotions of anger and sadness left her numb as the night grew colder around her. Her plan was simple. Just keep walking, away from the wedding, away from her family, away from the mess she'd left behind. But as she glanced at her reflection in the window of a shuttered boutique wearing all the red symbolizing a discarded bride. She suddenly felt deeply out of place. To anyone passing by, her elegant embroidered wedding outfit, that's when she heard a voice, gravelly and worn, break through the noise of her swirling thoughts. "Miss, you look like you've had a rough night." Her eyes snapped in the direction of the voice. Seated against a lamppost on the corner was a man with disheveled hair and tattered clothes, holding a tin cup. His face, weathered by years of hardship, bore an expression that was both kind and guarded. Guan instinctively recoiled, her instinct sharpened by years of caution. Her gaze darted back to the road, but the man didn't take her avoidance to heart. Instead, he gestured to a crate beside him. "Don't just stand there. Take a seat. Nobody's watching you out here," he said matter-of-factly. His calm tone caught her off guard. Normally, she wouldn't spare a response, but something about the moment, maybe exhaustion, maybe the surreal weight of the night, led her to pause. She took a few cautious steps closer. "I don't have any money," she blurted, realizing how defensive she sounded. The man chuckled quietly. "I'm not asking you for money, but you look like someone who's just lost something, or someone." That statement hung in the air between them. Guan hesitated, torn between brushing him off and sitting down. Against her better judgment, her body made the decision for her. Slowly, she lowered herself onto the crate, setting her veil next to her like it wasn't a symbol of anything she wanted to remember. "Maybe not," he replied evenly, "but I've seen enough. Sometimes, the people closest to you can cut deeper than strangers ever could." His words didn't sound rehearsed or intrusive. They just sat there, unassuming, but pointed enough to crack through her fragile emotional defenses. Guan turned to study him. He certainly looked no different from 1,000 nameless faces she'd passed before, yet there was something steady about his presence that didn't match his ragged appearance. "Who are you?" she asked bluntly. "Just a guy who's had the kind of fortune no one asks for," he answered with a shrug. "The name's Shi Guy, in case that matters to you." Her initial disdain for him flickered back momentarily. What mattered wasn't his name. It was the realization of how far she'd fallen to find herself sitting beside a beggar, uncertain of her next move. She stood abruptly, brushing herself off. "Thanks for the crate," she muttered, turning away. But an unexpected question stopped her in her tracks. "What if I could help you?" She paused, unsure if she'd heard him correctly. Slowly, she turned back, her narrowed eyes searching his face for traces of mockery or ill intent. There was none. He sipped from a tin flask, his expression still frustratingly neutral. "Help me? How exactly could you help me?" she challenged, folding her arms. The weight of her antique bangles felt ridiculous now. "No offense, but you don't look like someone who's capable of fixing anything." For the first time, he smiled, not a condescending grin, but one of quiet amusement, like her words revealed more about her situation than she intended. "I can give you something your fiancé and your family cannot," he said simply, tilting his head slightly. Her laugh came out dry and hollow. "What's that? Spare change?" he said, not skipping a beat. "Freedom." That single word rang in her ears. Freedom. She almost laughed again, but the complete absence of sarcasm in his voice silenced her. "And how exactly are you going to manage that?" she asked, her voice coated in skepticism. Shi Guy leaned back against the lamppost. "You're running from them, aren't you? Your family, this fiancé of yours. You want them to stop chasing you, to see you as someone they no longer control." He paused meaningfully. "Marry me, and they'll back off." The absurdity of the suggestion stunned her into silence. She stared at him, certain now he was out of his mind. "Marry," she started, but the words caught in her throat. Was this some kind of joke? "I'm serious," Shi Guy interrupted, his tone even and calm. "I know what you're thinking. Why would a stranger, a nobody, offer something like this? But hear me out. You'd be free. You said it yourself. Your family's pulling the strings now. You marry me, and suddenly they're burnt ties. They'll think you've truly severed yourself from that world they want you trapped in." Gwen blinked, her mind racing. The notion of marrying some man she'd just met felt wildly inappropriate and utterly desperate, a million miles outside the boundaries of her structured upbringing. Yet the logic of his words planted a dangerous seed. Could this be the solution? Marrying Chigai would indeed sink her family's plans. It would shatter the image they clung to so tightly, the illusion of control they held over her life. "And what's in it for you?" she asked quickly, her tone sharp, but her nerves betraying her. Chigoi calmly took another sip from his flask, unfazed by her question. "I get some company. A partner who's willing to try this thing called life without promises of riches or power. Maybe you'd even teach me a few things." His eyes glinted just for a moment, as though holding on to some private thought that he wasn't ready to share. "And I promise, I won't ask for much in return. Just the basics. Maybe a roof over our heads, a chance to start from wherever you land." Everything inside Guan screamed to shut down the conversation. The practical part of her brain reminded her that this was insanity, but the part of her that had been beaten down by betrayal, trapped under her father's control for years, and worn thin by societal expectations, clung to the sliver of hope that his idea provided. Chigai wasn't like the polished suits she had grown up around. His demeanor was foreign to her world, his words unpolished, yet sincere. And it was this very strangeness that gripped her, though she refused to admit it aloud. Desperation does strange things to people. Studies show that individuals often turn to unconventional solutions when faced with high-stakes pressure, driven by a primal need to reclaim some semblance of agency, even if it means taking risks that they'd ordinarily avoid. For Guan, Chigai was offering her exactly what her family's power structure denied: choice. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was contemplating a future with a man society had written off as valueless, all because he respected her autonomy more than anyone else in her life did. "She need an answer by?" she asked tentatively, realizing as she said it that she was entertaining his idea far more seriously than she intended. Chigai held her gaze, his patience unnerving. "Take the night if you need it, but if you want to burn bridges, you can't wait too long. I'm a simple man, pretty easy to find right here." She stepped away again, this time with a heavy swirl of emotions dragging at her. Before walking off completely, she heard him mutter behind her, almost inaudibly, "The world might surprise you if you give it the chance." Back in the quiet of her rented apartment, Guan replayed the encounter in her mind. Something about his peculiar calm, his lack of pretense, and that mysterious glint in his eye stuck with her. Who was he, really? Why had he offered such an unlikely solution to her problems? For the first time, her thoughts weren't swirling with resentment over her family, or moonlit regrets about the wedding hall. Instead, something new pierced through: curiosity. The next morning, as Guan prepared to take a step that would defy all logic, all expectations, she found herself asking the one question she hadn't dared to the night before. Was Chigua truly who he appeared to be, or was there something hidden beneath his tattered clothes and weathered smile that she couldn't yet see? The moment Guan spoke the words, "I will not marry him," the chaotic wedding scene erupted into something out of a nightmare. The lavishly decorated hall, once humming with the quiet sophistication of invited elites, turned into a stage for visible scandal. Murmurs rippled through the rows of guests like a slow-building wave crashing into loud disbelief. The boldness of her declaration caught everyone off guard. Rarely does a bride, especially one from an esteemed family like Gwen's, publicly destroy an engagement in this manner. Yet there she stood, her face pale but resolute, and it became clear that there was no joke, no misunderstanding. She wasn't going to marry Luminique. Her father was the first to react. His expression shifted from shock to unmistakable rage in the blink of an eye. He shot up from his seat, his chair scraping loudly against the tiled floor, and stormed toward her. "Have you lost your mind?" he bellowed, his voice filled with anger, the kind that could silence an entire room. But Guan didn't flinch. The guests, all watching intently, shrank back in their seats, partly out of second-hand embarrassment, partly from fear of catching the wrath of a powerful man in his darkest moment. Her father's face turned red as he fumbled over his next words. "Do you have any idea what you're saying? What this does to our family? To me?" Lemenyi, clearly unprepared to have his ego so publicly shattered, attempted to salvage the situation. "This is nonsense," he said, his tone calm on the surface, but seething underneath. He stepped closer to Guan, as if proximity might intimidate her into submission. "You can't ruin our family's arrangement over some childish whim. Apologize and we can still move forward." His confidence radiated through the hall, as if he was certain she'd retreat, that embarrassment would force her back into the script they'd all written for her life. But Guan was prepared to torch that script entirely. Her reply was simple, a direct, unwavering gaze that landed on Lumenyi like the sharp blade of a knife. Without raising her voice, she said clearly, "I will not." That was the moment the room tipped into full disarray. A gasp came from somewhere in the crowd, then another. Some whispered her name in disbelief, while others exchanged sharp glances. This wasn't just personal, it was social, public, a spectacle that would ripple through every corner of their world. The Liu family looked mortified. Lumenyi's mother sat frozen in her chair with her hand clutched tightly around her pearl necklace, her cheeks flushed with the indignity of it all. His father, meanwhile, was already on his phone, furiously texting what was likely damage control to aligned parties. In an outburst that matched his fiery temper, Guan's father turned to the Liu family with desperation written plainly across his face. He leaned toward the patriarch of the Liu family, attempting to explain away what everyone had just witnessed. "She's just overwhelmed," he said hurriedly. "No matter, we'll get this back on track. Please understand, this is still a..." But before he could utter another excuse, Guan stepped forward, physically cutting off her father, as if to symbolize her decision to place herself front and center after years of being hidden behind him. "This isn't a deal. It's my life," she said, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. The crowd hushed again, and for a second, just a second, there was a flicker of uncertainty in Lumenyi's calm exterior. Anger gave way to desperation as her father grabbed her arm, pulling her harshly toward him. "Do you have any idea what this will cost us?" His voice was low enough to avoid being picked up by the guests, but she could feel the force behind every syllable. "This arrangement is bigger than you. You are not walking away from this." She yanked her arm free, her eyes blazing with the kind of defiance that left no room for argument. "Watch me," she challenged, staring directly back into his furious gaze. Everyone in that room, from the youngest niece to the most distant business associate, had spent years watching Juan follow orders, please demands, and accept her role quietly. None of them had ever seen her like this before. Forceful, unyielding, and clearly prepared to face whatever storm came her way. It was the kind of resolve her father couldn't understand, let alone control. And yet, the storm did come. The fallout was immediate. The news had barely begun working its way out of the wedding hall when whispers reached beyond the venue walls. By the time the last straggling guests left their seats in shock and headed home, the story of a canceled wedding, a defiant daughter, and an enraged patriarch had already begun circulating in whispered circles. The Liu family, humiliated in front of their peers, wasted no time painting themselves as victims. "We were blindsided," one of their relatives reportedly said later that night at a separate social gathering. "She's just proven she has no respect for tradition, no understanding of responsibility." As much as anger poured into empty words and dramatic speeches, the real problem for both families was far graver. This wedding had not been just a wedding, but a crucial linchpin in a larger financial arrangement. Guam's refusal effectively dismantled years of planning. The business ties that were meant to be cemented between the two families now hung by a thread, teetering dangerously close to total collapse. By the next morning, one investor had already pulled out of a Liu family venture, citing instability as the reason. Guan had expected this. What she didn't expect was how private rebellion could quickly become public spectacle. Strangers on social media, who hadn't stepped foot in the hall that night, analyzed the situation as though it were an unfolding reality show. Some condemned her, claiming she had selfishly embarrassed her family and jeopardized business relations for personal reasons. Others praised her for her bravery, for standing against traditions steeped in control rather than compatibility. "She's just another rich girl causing problems," one online comment read. But another, in direct contradiction, read, "Finally, someone bold enough to take a stand." For women like Guan, however, defying family and societal norms carries weight far greater than a trending topic or a round of scandalous gossip during brunch. In many cultures, arranged marriages and family honor aren't just private agreements. They represent a deeply ingrained, despite modern shifts in attitudes toward individualism and free choice. The price of rebellion remains disproportionately high, especially for women. But for Gwen, the judgment of others paled in comparison to the larger truth. She had finally reclaimed something no wedding or societal custom could give her: herself. And even as her father furiously repeated words like scandal and disgrace to anyone who would listen, she refused to shrink under expectations that had shackled her for so many years. As the dust from the wedding disaster settled, and the gossip machine turned its attention back toward new scandals, Guan stood firm. Underneath the layers of disappointment from watching close friends fade away and realizing just how isolating standing alone could feel, there was also something else blooming: an unshakable sense of freedom. For the first time, she could look at her decisions knowing they were her own, but her path was just beginning to unfold. What no one in that room, neither Lemeni nor the loud family breathing heavily under the weight of embarrassment, nor her own father pacing back and forth in disbelief, could have known, was how dramatically her world was about to change. The firestorm of the wedding wasn't just a turning point for Gwen. Somewhere in the shadows of the chaos stood a figure so unassuming that most guests had walked past him without even noticing. Chigai, dressed in simple, worn clothes, watched quietly as the pieces began falling exactly where they needed to be. From his perch near the hall's entrance, he had a clear view of Gwen's moment of defiance, and as her father yelled and her fiancé fumed, Chigai's expression gave away a flicker of something subtle. Satisfaction? Amusement? Only he could say for sure. For now, he wouldn't approach her. Not yet. The time wasn't right. But even as Guan left the hall with her head held high and the weight of societal condemnation beginning to bear down on her shoulders, she had no idea how involved this quiet man, this nobody, would soon become in the tangled web of her life. QGI might have seemed insignificant, but his presence was anything but. What, exactly, did he know about this unfolding drama? And why was the man everyone dismissed so certain that the pieces were about to shift in his favor? But if the beggar you married turned out to be a billionaire? That question hit Guan like a physical blow as she stood frozen in the dimly lit conference room of the CC Group headquarters. The polished floors gleamed beneath the cold fluorescent lights, and seated at the far end of the massive table, dressed impeccably in a crisp, tailored suit, sat a man she barely recognized, but couldn't mistake. She guided her unassuming, ragged husband was no longer the man she had thought she married. He was Boss C, the CEO of the C. The revelation left her spinning. This was the same man she had begrudgingly married to escape the suffocating control of her family. The same man who had offered her nothing but freedom and simple companionship in return. How could she reconcile that image of him with the authoritative figure who now exuded wealth and power? "You must be wondering why I didn't tell you," he said finally, breaking the heavy silence. His tone was calm, measured. Not a trace of the quiet beggar she had spoken to under a dim lamppost days before remained in his voice. Guan stared at him, trying to form words, but disbelief clogged her throat. She shook her head, still rooted to the spot. "Why would you hide this from me? Why pretend to be—" She paused, searching for the right words, but finding none that could make sense of the situation. "A beggar?" he finished for her. his eyes locked on hers. Because it's easier to tell who someone really is when you strip everything away. Titles, wealth, power. None of that means anything when people look at you and see nothing. His words sent a chill through her. For the first time, the full weight of her decision to marry him sank in. She had thought she was choosing a life of obscurity, a life away from the suffocating expectations of her family, and instead she had chosen something far more complex. The irony unraveled itself in her mind. Like a cruel joke, she had married him to escape the trappings of wealth and influence, only to find herself standing before one of the most powerful men she could have ever encountered. The tension in the room grew thick as the weight of what he had orchestrated began to settle on her. He waved a hand, calling for an assistant to enter, and with efficient precision, they placed a portfolio on the table before Guian. Slowly, carefully, she opened it, flipping through papers that detailed the Liu family's shady dealings. Evidence of fraudulent contracts and underhanded business practices filled the pages, meticulously documented. Each revelation connected the dots of a larger scheme she hadn't fully understood, a network of greed and manipulation that had controlled not only her family, but countless others in their orbit. "This," Boss C said, leaning forward, "is everything I've been gathering about the Liu family's operations. They've built their empire on lies, and they've been pulling your family into their destruction with them." She looked up at him, the gravity of the situation dawning on her. He wasn't just a man grieving his difficult past, or hiding behind tattered clothes to avoid attention. This was someone with an agenda, someone who had waited for the right moment to strike. But for all the calculated precision he employed, there was no triumph in his voice as he revealed the depth of the Liu family's wrongdoing. If anything, there was something deeply personal about the way he lingered over the company name on one of the documents. It all clicked into place when Boss C rose from his chair and walked toward the window overlooking the city. 15 years ago, he began, his voice quieter now. "My family lost everything because of Liu Tian and his sons. They destroyed what we had, seized our assets, and built their fortune on the ashes of what my parents worked for. What they never counted on was me surviving." She wasn't sure what struck her harder, the sheer scale of his revenge, or the calm, steady control he maintained, even as he described devastation at the hands of the Liu family. While she had been shielded from much of the business world's grittier side by her family's money and her careful upbringing, it was suddenly clear to her that this was the world Boss C had spent years navigating, one where betrayal and ambition weren't just possibilities, but certainties. Her thoughts spiraled as she imagined everything she hadn't known about him. His quietness during their few conversations began to take on new meaning. Even his ragged appearance hadn't been accidental. It had been a choice, a way for him to step off the chessboard of high society, while secretly plotting to re-enter it as a player so powerful that no one could stop him. Initially, his motives left her unsettled. Was their marriage part of a larger plan? Had he chosen her because of her connections to the Liu family? Yet, even as these thoughts swirled in her mind, one undeniable fact remained. He could have done what he needed without her. He might have been methodical and deliberate in how he played his cards, but his offer to marry her, free of any condition. "Show me this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because," he said, turning from the window to face her, "they're your enemies now, too." His words landed heavily between them. The Liu family, who had once considered her an unworthy distraction, were suddenly vulnerable in ways they couldn't control. It was no longer just about their manipulation of the business partnership her father had tried to force. They had played their part in humiliating her, casting her aside when she didn't conform to their plans. Now Boss C had drawn her into their downfall, and she was no longer just an outsider, she was a threat. In a pivotal act of retribution, Boss C leveraged his power to systematically dismantle the family. The morning after he revealed his identity to Guan, the Liu family's standing took its first major blow. At a high-profile investor summit, Boss C stood on stage and exposed the fake CEO of one of the Liu family's subsidiary companies, a man carefully planted to enable their fraudulent practices. The presentation was seamless, the evidence irrefutable. That single move set off a chain reaction that sent the Liu family scrambling. Their business partners began withdrawing one by one, and international firms cut ties within days. The public fallout was as satisfying as it was swift. News articles began circulating about the real extent of their corruption, and while the Liu family rushed to release vague statements denying the allegations, their efforts did little to counter the overwhelming evidence. Guan watched these events unfold from the sidelines, every headline a reminder of the power Boss C held at his fingertips. And yet, through all of it, there was no sense of satisfaction on his face, no smugness in how he carried himself. This wasn't about gloating or winning. It was about justice, restoration, about undoing years of damage that had spread beyond just his life. Some might have called it revenge, but from where Guan stood, it was more like making things right. What struck her most was how little he asked of her during all of this. She had assumed, initially, that once his identity was revealed, there would be strings attached, expectations for her to play some role in his plans. But the opposite was true. He gave her space, letting her absorb the truth at her own pace. The power dynamics of their once unequal relationship had shifted so thoroughly, she wasn't even sure how to process it. But he never demanded anything of her. "We'll handle this together," he told her one evening, as the fallout continued to ripple through the city and beyond. "But only if you're ready. You have the right to step away from all of this if you choose." His words settled over her like a quiet reassurance. It would have been easy to feel like just another pawn in his carefully orchestrated game, but instead, he was giving her something she hadn't experienced in years: choice. As she stepped further into her own sense of power, she began to understand the complexity of the man she married. Bossier wasn't just wealthy or influential, he represented something deeper. His life, riddled with deceit and hardship, mirrored her own experiences with betrayal in ways that tied them together more than she ever would have expected. Beggar quickly realized just how much power she wielded now, not because of who she married, but because of what she had survived. When she walked into CC Group's offices with her head held high, her presence turned heads. Colleagues who once may have overlooked her instinctively paid attention. The same fire that fueled her defiance on her wedding day now burned brighter, and it was clear she was ready for the challenges that lay ahead. But while the Liu family struggled to tread water in the wake of their financial collapse, Guan knew that this was just the beginning. Their downfall had only set the stage for something far bigger, and her role in it was just starting to take shape. Guan stood outside the doors of the CC Group's newest subsidiary, clutching the folder containing the final paperwork for her new position. The title on the neatly printed documents read, Design Director, but the weight of it felt far heavier than words on paper. It wasn't just a new job. It was an entirely different life. Only weeks before, she had been a discarded pawn in her family's mouth. She was stepping into a role that required leadership, innovation, and the kind of confidence she wasn't sure she could summon. Her heart pounded as she finally pushed open the glass doors, greeted instantly by the buzz of office life, the hum of conversation, the soft tapping of keyboards, and the sharp whir of printers created a rhythm that she immediately felt out of step with. Her first steps into the building didn't exactly inspire warm welcomes. Faces turned toward her, assessing her with expressions that hovered somewhere between polite curiosity and thinly veiled doubt. The whispers began almost immediately. Some employees stopped mid-conversation to glance her way, their eyes darting toward her crisp suit and the portfolio tucked under her arm. In an industry as competitive as theirs, her sudden appointment wasn't going unnoticed. After all, this was a position that promised authority, influence, and most importantly, visibility. Whoever filled the role was expected to bring in results, and quickly. As she approached her office at the end of the hall, the woman showing her around turned to her with a forced smile. "This is where you'll be," she said, gesturing casually to the modest but well-furnished room. Guan thanked her, But the woman didn't linger. She walked off briskly, not even meeting Guan's gaze. The interaction left Guan uneasy. She sat down behind the sleek, unfamiliar desk and stared at the towering pile of neatly organized binders and notes, waiting for her input. The reality of the situation settled on her shoulders like an unwelcome weight. Her phone chimed softly, pulling her attention away from the office clutter. A single text lit up the screen. It was from Boss C. "You're exactly where you need to be," it read. It wasn't much, and yet it was more encouragement than she'd gotten from anyone else. She leaned back in her chair. The thought of his confidence in her steadied her momentarily, but it didn't erase her anxiety. The real challenges began almost immediately. On her first day, Guan attended a meeting with the senior team to review company strategy. The room was filled with seasoned professionals, all of whom seemed to speak in a shorthand language that made her feel like an outsider. One person, in particular, stood out: Vice President Wang. He was sharp-faced, well-dressed, and unmistakably unimpressed by her presence. Throughout the meeting, every time she made a suggestion or asked a question, his responses carried just enough condescension to undercut her without being outright disrespectful. "We've already explored that angle," he said at one point, his tone dismissive. When she offered an observation about a product design element later in the meeting, he smirked. "Sure, Director Guan, but we tend to rely on more practical approaches." The slight emphasis he put on her title felt deliberate, as though he wanted to remind everyone in the room that it was new and unearned. The tension wasn't limited to Wang. Breaking into this environment was proving far harder than she had anticipated. Her colleagues, while not outwardly hostile, treated her with a mixture of reservation and skepticism. They questioned her decisions, second-guessed her strategy, and even challenged her authority in subtle, pointed ways. "What does she know about leading a team like this?" she overheard one employee whispering in the hallway. The words left a sting. The doubts weren't just external. Gwen struggled internally as well, questioning whether she deserved the position at all. Imposter syndrome whispered constantly in her ear, reminding her of her unconventional path and amplifying her fears that someone would soon expose her as unqualified. She was a graduate of the Royal Academy of Belgium, but her career hadn't followed the linear path of others in the room. Her work had been exceptional enough to catch Boss C's attention, but still, it was hard not to feel like she was treading water in a sea of people expecting her to fail. This inner conflict wasn't just imagined. It's something many individuals experience, particularly women, when placed in high-stakes positions where societal or professional doubt amplifies personal insecurities. Studies have shown that imposter syndrome can manifest strongly in environments where people feel out of place or unsupported, a feeling Gaon had already become well acquainted with. She started second-guessing herself in small ways, hesitating before giving feedback, internally debating whether to approve minor projects, and rehearsing emails longer than necessary to make sure she didn't miss anything. But as the days turned into weeks, something began to shift. Small victories, almost unnoticeable at first, mounted slowly. One of Guan's early decisions involved pivoting an outdated product design campaign, targeting younger consumers. It was a risk, and some members of her team cautioned against it, but Guan pushed for it quietly but firmly, confident in her instincts. When the campaign went live, the results came fast. A sharp spike in user engagement and positive feedback from key demographics. Her breakthrough moment came during a tense negotiation with Sushi Group, one of the key partners aligned with Boss C's ventures. The meeting had the potential to dictate the success of an upcoming project, and the stakes were undeniably high. Guan had prepared meticulously, pages of notes, a detailed pitch, and alternative solutions for every anticipated objection. Yet the real moment of success came through structured dialogue, but through her willingness to adapt. When Sushi Group executives raised last-minute concerns about their branding alignment, Guan quickly pivoted her pitch to address their priorities directly, incorporating elements of their vision seamlessly into the proposal. Her approach was met with nods of approval, and by the end of the meeting, an official partnership. Little by little, she began to cement her position. Skeptical glances and whispered doubts turned into quick smiles and nods of acknowledgement in the halls. Boss C, though mostly distant, remained a steady source of silent encouragement. Though he rarely intervened directly, when he occasionally stopped by her office to check in, his presence alone was enough to remind her of the faith he had expressed in her ability. When recounting the sushi group victory, she couldn't help but notice the smallest trace of a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. Still, Glan's progress didn't come without its share of struggles. Colleagues like Juan continued to push back, though less overtly. Their opposition evolved into subtle challenges designed to undermine her decisions. "Are you sure about this direction, Director Guan?" he would ask during strategy meetings, often with a tone that made her second-guess her instincts. Each encounter was a delicate battle that required Guan to maintain her composure while reinforcing her authority. As hard as she worked to silence the voices of doubt within the office, those outside of it continued to taunt her. Headlines occasionally popped up, speculating that her position at the CC Group was purely nepotistic, another byproduct of her marriage to Boss C. On social media, commenters aired theories about her abilities, her relationship, and her past in equal measure. She knew better than to take online commentary to heart, but it was impossible to ignore the sting of strangers assigning their own narrative to her life. But amidst these challenges, small triumphs painted a clearer picture of her resilience. Day by day, Guan began to see herself not as an inexperienced outsider, but as someone capable of shaping her own path. Her decisions carried weight not because of her marriage, but because of her growing confidence in her abilities. The once daunting binders stacked high on her desk now became opportunities, chances to prove herself to her team, her skeptics, and most importantly, herself. Throughout it all, Boss C's quiet support remained a constant presence. His belief in her seemed unshakable, even during moments when she faltered. More than once, he reminded her that success isn't built on perfection, but on adaptability. "You're going to stumble," he told her after a particularly. One evening, during a rare quiet dinner at home, she asked him, "Why do you trust me so much?" "I'm still figuring this all out." "Because I know what it feels like to start over," he answered simply. "And I know you're stronger than you think." Gwen held on to those words as she continued navigating the labyrinth of her new life. It wasn't about becoming perfect overnight. It was about learning from her struggles and proving to herself that she belonged where she was. Though shadows of doubt still crept in at times, each day brought her closer to a place where the whispers of the past no longer mattered. Instead, her future began to feel real, tangible in a way that no one had ever allowed her to imagine for herself. But Guan's journey was far from over. While her new life carried moments of triumph, remnants of her old life still lingered in the background. The Liu family, wounded but far from defeated, had begun building their own plans to reclaim their power. Rumors of their schemes emerged in fragments, whispers of lawsuits, subtle attempts to destabilize CC Group partnerships, and figures from her past returning at the most unexpected moment. And of course there was Guan Wan. Her sister's name surfaced from time to time, a reminder that the betrayal which had started it all was far from forgotten. Despite the looming storm, Guan found herself standing taller than ever. The life she had chosen was unconventional and filled with challenges, but every step forward proved that it was hers. What mattered most was not the titles she held or the companies she worked for. It was the strength she had found within herself. Whatever came next, she would face it with her head held high. After all, the road she was walking wasn't just about overcoming her enemies. It was about finally living on her terms. The Liu family was unraveling, and they weren't going to take it quietly. Ever since that disastrous wedding day, when Guan tore apart their carefully orchestrated deal, they had been scrambling to regain the status and influence they had built for years. The cancellation of the business partnership with the CC Group wasn't just a blow. It was a full-scale catastrophe. Guan's public rejection of Lemeni had snowballed into a PR nightmare for the family, and inside their grand estate, the tension was palpable. Their entire reputation, one that had been curated through alliances, favors, and underhanded maneuvers, now hinged on repairing the damage Guan had inflicted. But the Liu family wasn't interested in mending relationships. What they wanted was revenge. Lemenyai's father, Liu Tian, sat at the head of their long, porcelain-wide dining table, where the family often held their strategy meetings, disguised as sophisticated meals. His usually calm demeanor had been replaced by a sharp edge, and with every name and plan thrown onto the table, his frustration only grew. "This mess is unsalvageable unless we eliminate her influence," he said bluntly, his voice cold. It was clear that they needed to shift into damage control. Guan had embarrassed them, sure, but the bigger problem was that she now posed a threat not only to their pride, but also to their remaining business interests. More troubling still was her connection to Boss C. "As long as she's tied to him, she has leverage," Liu Tian admitted reluctantly, stabbing his fork into a piece of fish like it had personally insulted him. Recognizing the depth of their losses, the Liu family focused their attention on discrediting Gwen. If they couldn't stop her connection to Boss C outright, they would chip away at any credibility she had. Their first move was calculated. They tapped into Guan Wan ever since that wedding debacle, and had been largely sidelined by both the Liu family and Gwen herself, lingering in the shadows where resentment was left to fester. This bitterness made her an easy target for manipulation. The Liu family knew exactly which buttons to push, spinning tales of how Guan's defiance had brought shame to their name and fractured the family's foundations. For Wan, who had always played second fiddle to Guan in both their household and social circles, it was affirmation of what she'd always felt, that Guan believed herself to be better, smarter, and more deserving. Fueling that resentment, they drew Wan into their plans with a facade of shared purpose. "She thinks she's untouchable now," one of the Liu uncles said, his tone steeped in condescension. "But we can change that." Wan, despite her insecurities, nodded silently, her jaw tight. They painted a vivid picture of how Guan's defiance had not only harmed the family, but destroyed Wan's reputation by association. By planting the seeds of division, they ensured that Wan would take up their cause. And of course, Wan's role wasn't just emotional. She had her own connections and access to Guan's past, a past that could hold vulnerabilities they could exploit. Meanwhile, the schemes against Guan ramped up far beyond her sister's petty resentments. The Liu family orchestrated a complex campaign of sabotage aimed directly at Guan's budding professional life. From canceled contracts with companies underhandedly influenced by the Liu name, to quietly spreading rumors about her incompetence, each move was small enough to go unnoticed on its own, but deliberate when woven together. One particular incident stood out. Guan had painstakingly planned a collaboration between CC Group and an innovative tech company. Everything seemed smooth. Contracts drafted, deals confirmed, until suddenly, the partner company pulled out. It wasn't until weeks later that Guan pieced together the truth. A member of the Liu family had whispered doubts into the ears of an investor over a shared dinner, their words carefully chosen to foster mistrust and horror that such an unreliable figure could be at the helm of such a high-stakes project. Beyond the professional field, the Liu family's assault crept into Guan's personal life as well. It started with subtle jabs disguised as gossip. They asked seemingly innocently, but she could hear the undertone of their doubt. Where once she had felt the burning sting of public judgment, now it was something more violating. She was being deliberately isolated, and it wasn't just outsiders who perpetuated this. Wan, now fully moved by her own grudges, found ways to infiltrate Guan's professional life through mutual acquaintances. Wan fabricated stories, painting pictures of Guan. "Did you know she barely speaks to anyone from the family anymore?" she once remarked to an associate of Guan's. "It's like we don't exist." Tensions reached new heights when Guan began uncovering the extent of these sabotage attempts. It wasn't immediate. Pieces came sporadically, like a puzzle handed to her from disconnected sources. But as the patterns became clear, so too did the purpose behind them. Every lost opportunity, every critical rumor, fed back into the Liu family's hand. They weren't just sending a message to her, they were waging a silent campaign to destroy the foundation she was trying desperately. Guan couldn't shake a single inevitable conclusion. The family had no boundaries. They were perfectly willing to push her toward ruin if it meant reassembling their once pristine empire. Under the surface, the Liu family's actions carried another heavy element: greed. Their schemes weren't just about avenging a bruised ego, but about clawing back the power and security that Guan and Bossy had inadvertently jeopardized. Research has often pointed toward how greed and ambition, when unrestrained, can lead to the collapse of interpersonal relationships, how these emotions can override even the closest familial bonds in pursuit of wealth or influence. In the case of the Liu family, their relentless pursuit of control poisoned their ability to see Guan or anyone else as more than pawns in their plans. Their manipulation of Guan was just another symbol of the depth of their commitment to reclaiming what they thought should never have been taken. Bossy quietly watched the fallout unfold, his calm exterior betraying little about his thoughts. When Guan shared what she was starting to piece together about the Liu family's efforts, he listened intently. His replies often carried the same measured quality she was used to. "They have their cards, but they're playing them too soon," he said one evening, almost with a sense of warning. He didn't underestimate the Liu family's desperation, but even as they tried to pull every lever they could find, he knew their tactics weren't infallible. For Guan, however, this wasn't just a political or business battle. It was deeply personal. Her sister's betrayal, the relentless campaigns against her character, and the targeted sabotage all culminated in an overwhelming sense of exhaustion. For every step forward, it felt like there were two obstacles waiting. She had to choose whether she would crumble under the weight of it all or push back harder than they ever expected. Her defining moment came during a quiet evening spent combing through documents in her office. As she reviewed old accounts and files, a task she had initially dismissed as trivial, one peculiar note caught her attention. It was a single transaction, buried among countless others, tied to the Liu family's dealings with the CC Group long before her involvement. The name attached to the transaction made her pause. Guan Wan, though innocuous on the surface, the context of the note didn't add up. It hinted at the possibility that the betrayal went beyond professional sabotage and into something darker. She pressed further, reaching out to former colleagues of her father, members of his social network, who had faded into the background after the wedding scandal. With every scrap of information she gathered, a larger picture began to form. A picture that revealed a web of deception and hidden truths tying the Liu family's actions to more than just their recent losses. Somewhere within these layers was the truth about her mother's long-answered death and the connection Wan and Liu Tian had worked so hard to obscure. This realization didn't spark fear. It kindled something far more dangerous: resolve. She had spent enough time running from the shadow of the Liu family's power, from the expectations they had tried to place on her since childhood. Now, she was rewriting the rules of the story. Every piece of evidence she uncovered shifted the balance of power and began preparing her for what would eventually come next. Yet, something told her this was only the beginning. The stakes had undeniably escalated, and Guan's battle with the Liu family was becoming a fight not just for control, but for truth. As their schemes grew more desperate, their vulnerabilities became more exposed. Their desperation was as much a weakness as it was a threat, and Guan was starting to realize she could use this to her advantage. But, as her own strategy took form, one thing became evident: the confrontation still to come wouldn't just end with the Liu family. They carried a potential to uncover secrets that could irreparably change her life forever. The room was quiet, except for the faint hum of the air conditioning, a stillness that didn't match the storm raging inside Guan. Her fingers hovered over the papers spread out across the desk, documents that linked her family to secrets so dark they left her stomach churning. For weeks, Guan had been piecing together the fragments of her family's dealings, bits of information scattered throughout her father's old accounts, and the meticulous records the Liu family hadn't been careful enough to erase. But this revelation wasn't something she could have prepared for. Her mother, the woman whose absence had been a quiet sorrow in Guan's life, hadn't simply died under mysterious circumstances years ago. She had been silenced. The words sat heavy in the report Boss C had quietly handed her. A pharmaceutical project, some rush deals, failed trials, all boiling down to a single, horrifying decision made by Liu Tian. Her mother had tried to bring it to light, digging into what she thought was a mistake, only to discover that those mistakes were deliberate. When she wouldn't back down, they found ways to ensure she couldn't act against them. The specifics of how her death had occurred weren't spelled out in black and white, but the implication was clear. The Liu family hadn't just taken projects, fortunes, or opportunities from others. They had taken her mother's life to protect their own empire. As Guan closed the last file, she leaned back in her chair, her breathing shallow. She stared at the ceiling, refusing to let the tears brimming in her eyes spill over. How had she lived for so long, completely unaware of the darkness surrounding her family? She had believed her mother's death was an accident, a tragic moment that had left a gaping hole in her childhood. Knowing her own father had turned a blind eye, forging alliances with the people responsible, brought an ache so deep it felt like it would consume her. The betrayal wasn't just external. It seeped into the very fabric of her being. Her father had raised her with an iron fist, instilling in her the importance of duty and family values, all while aligning himself with people capable of unspeakable cruelty. More than the Liu family's greed, it was her father's silence that cut the deepest. He must have known the way their lives shifted after her mother's death. The sudden alliances, increased profits, and his refusal to ever speak about her again. It was all evidence she hadn't seen in the moment. In the quiet solitude of her office, Guan replayed moments from her childhood, moments that had seemed mundane but now carried weight. Her mother's late-night arguments with her father, always muffled behind closed doors. The tension whenever Liu Tian visited their home. Her mother's exhaustion, the way her kind smile seemed stretched too thin in those final months. The clues had been there, but Guan had been too young, too sheltered, to see them for what they were. And now, all of it, the truth behind why her mother was gone, thrust itself forward, forcing her to reconcile what she thought she knew with what had really happened. The depth of the betrayal left her spinning. It wasn't just grief or anger. It was a complete collapse of her foundations. Uncovering truths like this can dismantle a person's identity. Studies have shown that when individuals learn devastating secrets hidden by the people they trust most, it doesn't solely change their perception of those individuals. It forces them to reevaluate their own sense of self. For Gwen, the woman she thought she was, the dutiful daughter, loyal to her family despite their flaws, was unraveling into something unfamiliar. This wasn't just about losing her mother. It was about realizing her entire childhood had been built on a lie, one that propped up the ambitions of others while burying the people they failed to silence. The weight of guilt soon followed. How had she lived for so many years under their roof, supporting them, defending them, without seeing the truth? The anger bubbling in her chest wasn't just directed outward. It pierced her, sharp and unforgiving. Every decision she had made up until now felt tainted by her complicity, however unintentional it had been. Her compliance, born out of fear and routine, had served to maintain the illusion. And yet, as the emotion threatened to overwhelm her, a different realization surfaced. Her guilt wasn't necessary. It wasn't her shame to carry. The actions that had led to her mother's death, the cover-ups, the alliances, were all things. The truth was out of the shadows, and it was hers to act upon. In the days after this revelation, Guan found herself withdrawing from the world around her. She needed time to process, to untangle the web of emotions that had ensnared her. Even Boss C, who often seemed to anticipate her thoughts before she voiced them, gave her space. His quiet presence during these moments was a form of support she hadn't known she needed. He didn't push, didn't demand answers or decisions, but was there when she finally raised her eyes from the mess of documents to speak. "They killed her," she whispered one evening, her voice cracking under the weight of the words. "And no one stopped them." Boss C nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "No one stood in their way before, but you're here now." His confidence in her, though steady, felt misplaced in that moment. "What am I supposed to do?" she asked, her frustration seeping into her voice. "They've been untouchable for years. Who's going to believe me when they've buried the truth so deep?" He leaned forward, his tone calm but unrelenting. "Truth has a way of surfacing when someone is willing to fight for it. That's what you have to do." It wasn't an instant transformation. Guan's decision to act wasn't born from a single conversation or a sudden surge of courage. It built slowly, piece by piece, as she replayed every betrayal, revisited every moment of doubt, and let herself fully feel the scope of what had been stolen from her and her mother. The grief remained, heavy and consuming, but alongside it came a sharper sense of purpose. The Liu family had spent years hiding their transgressions under layers of power and influence. But Guan wasn't the same person they had manipulated. She wasn't a pawn anymore. The life they had tried to contain her within had burned away, replaced by possibilities she hadn't noticed until now. Her mother's death wasn't going to be a footnote in their story. It wasn't going to fade into the background of business deals and societal masks. It was going to be the beginning of something far greater, the unraveling of the system they had built. Guam's pursuit of justice wasn't just about revenge or exposing their secrets. It was about reclaiming her narrative, taking the threads of her past and weaving them into something that could stand against the darkest parts of her family's legacy. Her decision wasn't without pain. Confronting these truths had cost her dearly. Her sister was now her adversary, her father a stranger. The few friendships she had once clung to had withered away under the weight of the scandals that surrounded her. But despite the loneliness, there was a growing resilience within her, a determination she hadn't realized she was capable of. Studies suggest that uncovering hidden truths, while painful, can lead to profound personal transformation. It reconfigures the way individuals see the world and their place in it, often igniting a strength they never knew they had. For Guan, this was no exception. What came next wouldn't be easy. The Liu family wasn't just going to fold under the pressure of her knowledge. They had spent years using money and fear to silence others, and they wouldn't hesitate to do the same to her. But Guan wasn't interested in running anymore. The fear that had once paralyzed her was gone, replaced by something far more powerful: the need for justice and the drive to create a future her mother would have been proud of. As she prepared to confront the Liu family, Guan knew the battle ahead would come with risks far greater than she had faced before. Standing up to them meant more than uncovering old secrets. It meant putting herself squarely in their sights. Yet, rather than shrinking back into the shadows, she made her next moves quietly, but with certainty. Each decision she made was another step toward dismantling their empire. The truth about her mother's death had reshaped everything she thought she knew about her life, but it also clarified her path forward. For the first time, Guan wasn't moving out of fear or obligation. There was no script to follow, no expectations to meet. Every step was hers. And as she tightened her grip on the evidence in her hands, she steeled herself for what would come next. Secrets had controlled her family for years. Now, those same secrets would be the Liu family's undoing. The grand estate was eerily quiet, its opulence cloaked in shadows, as Gwen stepped carefully through the main hallway. The Liu family's fortress of control was vast, a place meant to intimidate anyone who dared oppose them. But Gwen wasn't here to cower. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, uncovering enough evidence to expose their wrongdoings and dismantle them completely. Still, the air felt colder inside these walls, and she couldn't shake the feeling that every step further was drawing her closer to something dangerous. She wasn't alone in this fight. Boss C had made sure of that. while Guan took calculated risks to confront Lu Tian face to face. Boss C focused on executing the larger plan, crippling their finances, forcing their hand, and ensuring there was nowhere for the Lu family to hide once the truth emerged. They worked together seamlessly, their individual strengths complementing the other. Guan's determination and personal history with the Lu family gave her a vantage point no one else could replicate, while Boss C's unmatched precision and resources ensured they stayed one step ahead. "They'll try to scare you," Boss C had told her earlier that day, "but fear is their weapon. You stay calm, you'll take that away from them." Despite his advice, Guan couldn't completely ignore the growing tension in her chest as she neared the locked study at the end of the hall. This was Lu Tian's inner sanctum, the place where he had held countless private meetings, drafted secret agreements, and possibly orchestrated her mother's downfall. Everything she needed to crack their empire wide open was in that study, and the Lu family undoubtedly knew it. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the cold brass doorknob, when suddenly the sound of heavy boots echoed from behind her. She spun around, but it was too late. Two of Lu Tian's men lunged forward, grabbing her arms before she could react. Their expressions were stoic, their grip iron-tight, as they dragged her away from the hall. She thrashed, trying to free herself, but their strength outmatched hers. They hauled her into a side room, the curtains drawn, the walls bare except for dim sconces casting flickering light. Across the room stood Lu Tian himself, calm as ever, his crisp gray suit immaculate. His expression betrayed no anger, only a cold amusement. "Guan," he greeted her, his voice unsettlingly cordial. "I was wondering when you'd finally show your face." "What are you so afraid of?" she shot back, refusing to let fear seep into her voice as she glared at him. "You knew this day would come, and yet here you are, thinking you have control," he replied smoothly, stepping closer. His tone was heavy with condescension, as if speaking to a defiant child. "You don't understand the world you're playing in, Guan. You're not equipped for this." She bit back the retort forming on her tongue, scanning the room instead. The guards flanked her on both sides, and Lao Tian's confident stance radiated power. He wouldn't hurt her yet. He wanted to linger in this moment, to re-establish his dominance after her rebellion, but that wouldn't last in the end. Her defiance threatened everything he had built, and men like him didn't let threats walk away freely. The minutes dragged, as Lu Tian threatened her with thinly veiled warnings. He painted vivid pictures of what would happen to her if she continued down this path, the fallout she would face, the ruin her name would become. Guan stared at him quietly, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing fear in her eyes. Despite the tension in the room, her thoughts flickered briefly to Boss C. Had he anticipated something like this? Were his backup plans already in motion? Her answer came moments later, when the dull roar of crashing glass exploded from somewhere down the hall. The sound startled the guards, their attention momentarily snapping away from her, and that was all the opportunity she needed. With a swift elbow jab into the ribs of the man on her right, she broke free, her heart hammering as she sprinted for the door. Lu Tian barked orders behind her, his frustration clear now. But Guan, she ran through the hallways, her shoes pounding against the tiled floor, the chaos behind her spreading like wildfire. It wasn't long before she rounded the corner and found herself face to face with Boss Sai. He was calm, as always, the faintest hint of a smirk tugging at his lips when he saw her. Behind him, a few of his men filed in, efficiently dismantling what little security the Lu family had left. The sight of him standing there brought a surge of relief she hadn't realized she desperately needed. "Took you long enough," he said casually, his tone unshaken despite the chaos erupting around them. "I had a slight detour," she managed to reply, catching her breath. Boss C handed her a flash drive, his expression turning serious. "Everything we need is on here. It's over for them." But the battle wasn't finished yet. The Lu family, cornered and desperate, made their last stand. Lu Menni himself emerged from the fray like a man with nothing to lose, his smirk replaced by an unhinged determination. He moved to block Guan and Boss C's path, swearing that they wouldn't make it out with what they'd stolen. Seeing him now, unguarded and unraveling, Guan thought of how easily her family had tried to hand her over to this man. She realized with startling clarity how lucky she had been to escape. Lenny lunged toward her, but before he could reach her, Boss C stepped in with an effortless precision that left him sprawled on the floor within seconds. Guan barely had time to process what had happened before they moved again, weaving through the now chaotic estate. Lu Tian's influence was crumbling in real time, his authority reduced to shouted orders that no one seemed willing to obey. The true victory came as they burst out of the building and into the view of waiting reporters. The Lu family could hide behind wealth and closed doors no longer. Boss C had ensured that. Carefully timed leaks to the press meant that journalists were already stationed outside, cameras capturing everything. Guan stood front and center beside Boss C, clutching the flash drive containing undeniable evidence of the Lu family's crime. She didn't need to speak. The image itself was enough to set the narrative. From there, everything happened quickly. The evidence was handed over to the authorities. Investigations launched almost immediately. The Lu family's days of power and untouchability were officially over. It wasn't just about dismantling their empire. It was about exposing them for who they really were. Every deal, every betrayal, every crime came to light, and the fallout spread like wildfire. Investors abandoned them, allies turned their backs, and public opinion swiftly condemned them. But for Gwen, the victory wasn't just about taking them down. It was about finding her voice in the storm, reclaiming her place in a world that had tried so hard to silence her. The partnership between her and Boss C had withstood its greatest test, proving time and time again that together their strength was unmatched. Their triumph wasn't just a shared victory, it was personal. In the quiet moments that followed the storm, as the house of cards her enemies had built finally collapsed, Guan felt a new kind of peace settle over her. She was no longer a product of her family's control or the schemes of others. She was her own person, standing tall in a life she had fought to shape. Boss C, ever the calm presence by her side, looked at her as the dust settled. "Not bad for someone who wasn't equipped for this," he said, with the faintest smile, referencing Lu Tian's earlier taunt. His words carried a rare warmth, one that only deepened her growing realization of how much their bond had endured, transformed, and strengthened throughout everything. "Bad at all," she replied, her voice steady. Theirs wasn't a typical love story, but it was grounded in something stronger than fleeting emotions. It was built on trust, mutual respect, and the willingness to stand together when everything felt impossible. Partnerships forged in crisis often reveal the unshakable truths about people, and for Guan and Boss C, it showed them that their connection wasn't just enduring, it was transformative. The road ahead wasn't without challenges, but the worst was behind them. And perhaps for the first time, Guion wasn't afraid of those challenges. She welcomed them, knowing she wouldn't face them alone. The Lu family's fall had marked the end of one chapter, but for Guan and Boss C, it was also the beginning of something greater. With the weight of the past finally lifted, the future was entirely theirs to write. Life after the fall of the Lu family didn't resemble the fairy tales Gwen had dreamed about as a child. Instead, it was something heavier and more real, a world they were learning to navigate together, step by step. On the surface, there was a quiet sense of satisfaction in knowing she had taken back her power. But just like cracked porcelain, the fractures of the past didn't magically disappear. Guan and Boss C now found themselves facing the question no one ever really considers. After the storm has passed, how do you rebuild? Gwen poured herself into her work, using her newly minted position as design director as more than just a job title. It became her stage to redefine who she was. And while there were lingering whispers, speculation, that her success was handed to her through her connection to Boss C, she silenced that noise by proving her worth through action. At one of her first major projects, she walked into the conference room with key CC Group executives and advisors, design boards in hand, ready to lead the presentation. She was calm but focused, and when Vice President Wang tossed out a thinly veiled comment about letting experience guide the direction, she didn't blink. "Experience guides action, but innovation solves challenges," she replied with precision. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. The consensus from the group said, enough. She'd earned their respect, without gimmicks or apologies. Boss C watched from his usual measured distance, quietly observing how Guan was carving out her role in a world that had once swallowed her whole. There was no need for him to step in. She had insisted on this autonomy. What he offered instead was the kind of support that didn't require flashy gestures. A conversation at the end of the day, an encouraging word after a rough meeting, or simply being nearby when she needed silence. It was a dynamic that surprised both of them at first. Their marriage had started as a calculated choice, born out of desperation and necessity. Now, it had evolved into something neither of them had planned, a partnership rooted in respect and balance. Their private moments, however, revealed the delicate reality of their situation. The aftermath of deception lingered between them like the shadow of an He didn't look away. "That's fair," he said after a moment. "But you don't need to wonder. Not anymore." For all his composure, there were moments like these, when Boss C let down his guard just enough to remind her that trust was something they were rebuilding together. Rebuilding wasn't limited to their relationship. Guan's empowerment began having ripple effects in the spaces around her. Her success as a leader, particularly her ability to adapt and thrive, became a point of inspiration for the teams under her. One particular incident stood out. A junior designer, obviously nervous and lacking the confidence to speak during meetings, had consistently deferred to more seasoned members of the group. Guan invited her to a casual lunch one afternoon and asked simple but pointed questions about her ideas on a product campaign. By the time the designer left the lunch, her reluctance had faded slightly. The following week, she presented a concept that was not only creative but crucial to landing an important deal with an international firm. "Your voice matters," Guan had told her afterward, and it was a phrase that lingered throughout the office long after that project ended. This impact wasn't something Guan had anticipated. In trying to find her own place, she had inadvertently become a symbol of possibility for those around her. This mirrored her own transformation, a realization that growth is never just an individual process. It creates pathways for others. Research backs this notion, highlighting how personal empowerment has a ripple effect, inspiring communities and even influencing institutional change. Guan's growing confidence wasn't just improving her own trajectory. It was building a system where others could thrive as well. But not all challenges could be neatly resolved within conference rooms or business pitches. Outside the confines of her newfound role, there were still battles to fight. The remnants of the Liu family, though ruined in reputation and power, remained a recurring thorn. Their attempts to regain control, particularly through legal disputes and whispers of counter-narratives, occasionally surfaced in inconvenient ways. Guan found herself at the center of unwanted attention when a journalist published an op-ed questioning the legitimacy of Boss C's accusations against the Liu Empire. The piece insinuated that Guan had fabricated elements of her mother's story for sympathy, a claim that left her reeling. Bossy had been prepared to respond, drafting statements and organizing a swift rebuttal to discredit the article. But Guan surprised him. "No," she said firmly. "Let me. I'm more than capable of answering this." And she was. Her response, delivered during a live-streamed interview later that week, dismantled each of the journalist's claims with a mix of emotional authenticity and cold facts. While she acknowledged the pain of revisiting her past, she didn't let it define her entire. She was more than her tragedies, she reminded the world, and she wasn't going to let anyone rewrite her story again. Moments like these tested both her resilience and her relationship with Boss C. They were a reminder of how precarious their reality could still feel, like crossing a bridge that hadn't fully finished being built. But each challenge also reinforced something unshakable, the idea that neither of them had to face any of it. For every moment of self-doubt Guan experienced, there was a quiet moment of reassurance from Boss C. And for every external threat they faced together, she proved that her strength wasn't just a product of his influence, but an extension of her own growth. Over time, even their quietest moments carried weight. One evening, sitting together on their apartment balcony overlooking the city lights, Guian shared something she hadn't said aloud before. "I don't think I would have recognized myself a year ago," she admitted, her gaze fixed on the skyline. "Everything I thought I needed back then, status, approval, it's so far removed from who I am now." Basia's response was simple, as usual, yet layered with meaning. "That's because you figured out what actually matters, and that's harder than anything the Low family ever threw at you." It became increasingly clear that their story wasn't about erasing the conflicts of the past. It was about navigating them together. That's what made their happily ever after feel authentic. It wasn't perfect or seamless. It was messy, layered, and real. What bound them wasn't just love, but the shared understanding of what it meant to survive hardship and emerge stronger. The research-backed insights on love and resilience often emphasize this exact point. Long-time relationships are less about avoiding conflict and more about facing it head-on, learning and growing together through every chapter. Boss C and Guan's partnership demonstrated this in its rawest form. Each setback, be it personal doubts or vocal critics, became another opportunity to deepen their bond. What was once a practical arrangement built on logic had turned into something profoundly emotional and unbreakable. Their work as individuals didn't stop either. While Guan continued growing a career that now carried genuine weight and influence, Boss C quietly expanded his empire in ways that aligned with values he hadn't openly embraced before. Together, they prioritized initiatives that spoke to their shared experiences, mentorship programs, projects aimed at dismantling exploitative practices in sectors like the ones tied to the Liu family. The changes weren't sweeping, but they were deliberate, seeded with the kind of long-term planning that characterized everything Boss C touched. But then, does the future hold for Guan and Boss C? That question is deliberately left unanswered, as it should be. Their story, though tied to triumph against the odds, doesn't hinge on a fixed endpoint. Instead, it's a continuous process, one defined not by the absence of challenges, but by their ability to meet those challenges together. For Guan, the future feels less imposing now. It's no longer something to fear or avoid, but something to shape. The final moment of the chapter isn't some grand declaration or sweeping romantic gesture. It's much simpler. Guan, returning home after a late evening at the office, finds Boss C sitting at their small kitchen table, flipping through reports while the soft hum of city traffic drifts through the open balcony doors. She sets down her bag and, without a word, sits across from him. He glances up via one of gratitude, of respect, of love. "You're late," he says with the faintest of smiles. "And still working," she shoots back, her tone light. Their laughter, quiet and genuine, echoes softly in the room. It's not perfect, it's not final, but it's theirs. And for now, that's all either of them needs. True worth isn't measured by wealth or status, but by the strength of one's character and the depth of one's connections. Guan's story shows that resilience and kindness can defy societal expectations. Leading to a life full of reflection is key. If this story moved you, imagine what other transformative tales can teach. Hit subscribe and join us for more stories that challenge perspectives and celebrate the strength we carry within us.